Well, thanks. Glad to be here today. I knew this would happen. It always does.
See if it works a little better if it's close.
Is that better? All right. Now I feel like I'm doing karaoke today. Right on, right? Not so much. Pleasure to be here. I'm always glad to follow a mayor. No pressure, right? It's been a while since I've presented, so a little jittery, but I'm sure I'll come right around pretty quick. So glad to come out and represent the State Fire Marshal's office. We're kind of a unique department. We work under public safety for the state. A lot of times when we do get fire investigations, we talk to representatives from your groups wanting reports. We talk to fire investigators from the private side that are doing investigations. So we just kind of tie in. State law says that fire chiefs of each municipalities determines origin and cause of a fire. And then they're more than welcome to call us for assistance because it is pretty complicated field and takes a while to get familiar with all the investigation techniques. So the other side of our office, we do fire investigation, or excuse me, inspections. So we go out and try to mitigate risk as well on that side. So we piece all that together, do the best we can. Some of you, if you've been here in the past, Mike Young used to teach this before me. So I got the presentation from him, went back through, augmented, changed it. He took other work, but he's still part-time with us. He's helping to coordinate the prison project. So I always tell everybody he went to prison. So just to help him out a little bit. So yeah, and so my areas, we're assigned geographically. So I tell everybody I have the notch of Utah up in the north end. I'm from Cache Valley up that way, and beautiful place and getting very busy. If you ever do need to contact us, firemarshal.utah.gov, pretty simple to find. We also have an LP division, so we'll do LP gas. So we're able to use those guys when we need them for investigation purposes. We have a hazmat group, some specialized plan reviews, all that good stuff. So some of you, or maybe a lot of you, are already familiar. So basically, what is fire? This is a definition that comes out of 921. This is our manual we actually use. And hopefully the looks like that would beat up by your investigators tabbed and that's used quite a bit so that you can actually understand all of the investigation purposes. But every time there's always this big long definition that we always have to know. The basics of it is you have a chemical reaction and you have your heat, fuel, and oxygen that are going to help you have fire. So if you take one of these elements away, you don't have the definition of fire anymore. It'll smolder, it goes out, whatever it may be. So we always start with all the science. When you get in courtrooms, it's science-based. We have to use scientific method. So we make sure everybody understands all the very basics of what we're doing. So in our field, we're conducting a hazard analysis. Every time we go out and do an inspection, we're trying to make sure we look for things that are going to cause problems, just as you guys do in the field, as far as if you're mitigating your risk, looking out for your workplace safety. Our methods are just more to prevent the fire and get ignition sources away from fuel sources. So inspectors doing kind of the same thing as what a OSHA inspector would do as well, except it's for the worker rather than the workplace a lot of times. So we use the International Fire Code. It's grown over the years quite substantially from about 2009 to our current one of 2018. It has gotten very thick. Most of the fire code is not so much proactive as a reactive. When something bad happens, they get together and they add more stuff to the book. It ends up being proactive on the end, but it starts out reactive. So it's kind of different. A lot of the portions are in parts, so they make more sense as you go through the book. Really helps to understand that, so you get in the right portions of the book as you go along. And then there's also the building code. So the building and the fire code have many chapters that are the same, and then other ones that are different. And the reason is fire code is prescriptive. So buildings get commissioned by a building official, and that's like the one-time pass off, as I call it. They make sure all the safety's in place, the building's built correctly, and then we get to use this book to go back out and ensure that it's safe from occupant changes, remodels, all that interesting stuff. So, and we do adopt this through the legislative sessions in Utah code. So we have this little disclaimer in here. I don't know if anybody's familiar with the cowboy after OSHA. There is no way this is going to cover all the topics, but it's kind of tough to do your job when you get all of the requirements that are out there. So we just want to make sure you know there's a bunch more things than what's in this slide presentation for sure. So there's a few of these that Mike had in here, and they're excellent to look at for understanding some of this potential. Anybody want to guess what this building was before? It was actually a fire station. So that was the Park Valley Fire Station up north. This was a fire investigation that Mike did, and it turned out to be a gas line that was broken by snow. So snow finally breaks off, comes down. Industry says you can protect these valves so they don't get broken. However, that one didn't get the protection. So kind of interesting. Extension cords. This was a house fire up in northern Utah. We do see a lot of extension cord fires. It's kind of interesting. There's a lot of myths out there about how an extension cord, if you wrap it around stuff, it'll change the resistance. We've since found that's not true. There's nothing to change the resistance. It's all about heat release. So if the cord's getting warm and it can't release the heat and it's tied up, then eventually it'll get enough heat, it'll fell the conductors and the insulation. So we do see quite a few of those, more than we'd like to, obviously. That's where we do our inspections and try to make sure that we mitigate the best we can. Power taps is another big one we always seem to have. If you plug more than one power strip, as a lot of people know them to be, you plug those power taps together. Every one of them you plug together, whatever their overload protection is, say 15 amps, you put two of them together, and now you have 30 amps before anything will protect it, and it keeps going. And I saw them up to 7 plugged together across the floor. And I believe the reason is when you go into your local stores, they always have those for sale with the little tiny whip cords. And nobody really understands that they do sell them with up to a 25-foot cord. So every one of these power taps really has to have its own receptacle to be plugged in, and just it by itself. So if you ever happen to see that, especially in your homes as well, remember that it's going to take your overload away and cause a fire. It just heats up all the wires all at once. So kind of handy to know. Cooking, exterior cooking. We still have a ton of these, unfortunately. And this one was a firefighter's home. So we are not immune to all this stuff by any means. It just seems to happen like that. The grill is down on the ground on this one in the picture, but I believe it was on the porch originally. And so when we're looking at some of these with our fire patterns, does it look like there's a big V possibly where that grill is if you was looking at the patterns both ways? So that's one of the indicators we use as far as investigating out of our manual to help us use our scientific method to prove that we're in the right spot for our investigations. So there's a lot of things that are left behind on a fire. A lot of people don't really realize that. They figure, oh, cool, I'm going to burn it all up and nobody will ever even know I was here. And it just doesn't hold true a lot of times. Waste accumulation, there we go, I'll say it right. This is a home up in northern end of the state as well. The window, you can see where they had to cut it out. The reason they had to cut it out is they couldn't make safe entry for all the stuff that was inside the home. Typically, a lot of this, I mean, it adds fuel load to the outside. If the house burns on the outside, it will then extend to your neighbors, forests, all that other fun stuff. I know wildland fires have been a hot topic this whole season, and rightfully so. This is a great example of, boy, if they clear stuff away, when the fire is coming towards the house, it won't have a chance to light the house. And the same, if the house is on fire, it won't have a chance to light the vegetation. So you do hear a lot more about zero landscape, stuff like that, zero-scaping. It's good to know. This is the interior of the home. He put on there, is this excessive? We see a lot of those when we go in and investigate fires, and it's very labor intense. When you do find the area of origin of the fire, now you still have to move all this stuff out of the way to even get to the area of the origin. So it's quite time consuming when you do get in there, but we want to do our due diligence for sure. This is the basement of that same home, and clearance from ignition sources was the problem. There was paint fumes in the basement of this house. The appliance kicks on, the water heater. The fumes catch the water heater and it flashed and started burning down in the basement. So very quick fire with a lot of fuel load and very tough access. So multiple things that can happen on some of these fires. It makes it very difficult. Hazardous materials storage, that's another huge one. I'm sure many of you are familiar with that in risk. Anytime we do get these specialized products, they need to be stored properly. They need to have amounts stored in an area that's not excessive. In the fire code, we have a big chart that shows controlled amounts that are allowed in one spot. We call them fire areas as we look at it as code. So flammable liquids will need to be in cabinets. That's a explosion-proof cabinet and flame rated, and the fumes are able to stay in it when it's closed, several things like that. This one here is a larger one, and this was out in the basin years ago. There we go. That's the explosion. It was Adler hot oil years ago. I'll back that one up here in just a second. You can see it again. Sometimes people miss that one the first time, but very interesting. LP gas tank was to blame for this one. LP gas tanks inside buildings is a huge issue. We still see this a lot. Most every bottle you read is going to say for outdoor use only, and they're required to be stored outside. When natural gas, or excuse me, when propane, liquid propane, expands from liquid to vapor, it expands 270 times. So it turns into this huge fuel source. Okay, so here comes your explosion again off to the left. And that was the neighbor's footage and the Betts trucking out there. And then this is inside the trucking shop. Very violent. Natural gas has an octane rating of roughly 130 when compared to gasoline. I couldn't find the one for LP gas, but they're similar properties, so it's got to be right there close. So sorry I didn't get that in time for this, but very good to know. We really like to have this stuff out of the way. There's another one that you'll see the explosion video that we obtained investigating out there at the time. It's pretty easy to see why there's sticks left a lot of times. So, and explosions are interesting. When we do investigate those, we have to go a larger scope, and you look at them like a balloon filling up in a room, and whatever gives out first, it pops. It's very interesting science on those as well. I performed a fire investigation Sunday that had an explosion in a basement. The fire department used no water to put it out. The explosion put out the fire. So it's kind of interesting, the dynamics of those. So here we have clearance to combustibles. You can see that tank right inside. This is inside a garage. I generally run into a lot weeds and brush up next to LP tanks. So that's when we'll have them on our inspection side, cut down the weeds, maintain the area. Flames that actually get right to the tanks are going to overheat them, and they call it a levy. It will start on fire, and it's changing that gas to vapor, and it's very violent. And the levy is not quite an explosion, but it's boiling liquid event that's happening. So interesting stuff. Hazardous materials are always kind of scary. So are your buildings secure? This is one he had in here. This is a nursing home they had moved out of. The dark mark you see going down the hall there, we call that a trailer. And that is somebody's been in there and used the material to light the building. They wanted to light the whole building on fire. So they put down, a lot of times it's toilet paper. Believe it or not, Doritos burn really great, Frito corn chips. There's a lot of different things you can use as a trailer. Anything that has an oil base to it. There's a whole bunch of other trade secret things we keep on our end so that the general public never gets a chance to know what we're investigating as well. People are very crafty and they use a lot of timing devices, all sorts of interesting things. It's really hard to know how to recognize all of them, but we do our best with what we can. So whatever's presented in front of you, that's what you get to use. Here's security. This is one I had in a county close to here. This was a vacant building. They had problems with security for 10 years. It's a little bit rougher neighborhood. People break in and squat in there, and pretty soon one day it's on fire, and we get out there and we hope nobody's in it. Get our drones out. Still couldn't find one guy. The next day they found him. Thank goodness. He was asleep in another building down the street. So it's very good to have security in place for your buildings, and especially the new construction sites. A lot of these new buildings that are going up, we had a bunch of residential buildings this last summer that we did investigate. And security is the number one thing. If people can't get into that site, you're going to protect your investment a lot better, especially when lumber's so high right now, factors like that. So security is a great thing to have in place. Fire code has it, as well as OSHA. OSHA wants that work scene for safety. This one was a school down in the central part of Utah. It's not the best picture, but there is a device they've decided to use and tried to start the roof of the school on fire, and it was unsuccessful. Probably due to the membrane roof. Membrane roofs come in 3 different grades. Your highest grade one is being a flame resistant. Some of the other ones, the lower grades, they burn very well, and it's nice black smoke, and it doesn't take long. The whole roof's on fire. So depending on what your grades of roofing are, they're going to tell you how successful you are on some of these fires like that. Fleet vehicles, do they have recalls? That's another good thing to be looking out for. There's tons of recalls. A lot of people are driving around in cars that has recalls that may cause a fire and they don't even know. So Consumer Products website, they can give you information. You can look those up, which I'm sure many of you are familiar. The picture on the left side here was at a residence, and he said they were general vehicles, but one of them had a recall. The one on the right happened to be one of those side-by-sides of Polaris. I'm sure many of you remember when they was igniting on fire for quite a while, and I believe they've finally got a hold of that. We have a little bit less loss there, but plenty of toys around now. Everybody seems to have them, so I'm kind of jealous of my neighbors sometimes. Like, man, I want that. So Lots of stuff. Lightning's always a hazard too. And obviously we have no controls over that. This is a cabin that was out in the basin area as well. And you see all these multiple antennas on top of it. The individual did not have any lightning protection, but he was afraid the government was watching him. So he put up all these extra antennas and was monitoring all sorts of stuff. And if you look up at the top of the roof, you can see the peak is gone right there. And sure enough, it hit the building. The gentleman was not even around at the time, but they were quite worried he was going to come around. He just wasn't in the most sane state of mind from what I've gathered. So we see some really weird things. And here, once again, vegetation around a wood building like that. That's an easy mitigation of risk to take the fire from not being able to burn up to the cabin and start the cabin on fire. So it's tougher with residential because we don't inspect residential. You know, constitutional right of privacy, people get to do what they want generally unless insurance tells them otherwise. So interesting fire. And this one he had in here, I kind of smiled because this is in my hometown. I remember this fire, and I didn't even remember that he'd come out and investigated it. So older buildings without the grounds, they do get hit by lightning, and it seems to cause a little bit more typically because we don't have that direct link with all our electricity going to ground. This one actually hit the satellite dish, and it chased back down from the satellite dish on the coax till it made contact with other wires and part of the house. That one's a pretty tough one to mitigate, I would think, other than lightning rods on a home, and most people don't seem to go quite that far. So did your fire alarm system work? And do they monitor off-site? Years ago, the fire codes did not require monitoring off-site for all fire alarm systems. A lot of the schools that we've upgraded this last few years, it was always up to the neighbors to call in and tell the dispatch center that the fire alarm was going off. Most of those are now mitigated. There's still some that we're working through, but the dialing portion of the fire alarm panel ensures that it calls a monitoring station, which then calls fire department for a quick response. So we really, we like that upgrade a lot. It does help for sure. And if these are maintained and operable, and a lot of inspectors get out there and you find a panel that hasn't been touched for 3 years and has a bunch of troubles lit up on it, saying it needs help, it happens. So the more we can get out there as inspectors and keep on top of it and do annual inspections, the more we get a check on all these systems to make sure they're doing what they need to be doing. So some common fire code violations, as we went through, we've talked about a little bit of that there. The record keeping one I put on there, because it plays back into all of your systems, your fire risers, your fire panels, any special systems you may have. The owner is required to keep 3 years worth of records on all of their inspections on site. And then it's up to the fire marshals or inspectors to ask for those records as they see fit. And a lot of times we do get a look at the little tags that are placed on the panels. Some people believe you have to keep those old tags, and you don't. The tag is more of a courtesy for the inspector so that we can see that it is in fact up to date. Most of your systems are 6-month intervals or annual intervals, depending on the system. Vegetation, like we've talked about, clear cut back away from the buildings. That also plays into the urban wildland interface codes. And Utah does have an interface code. It's a special one they actually built in 2006. And they've kept that one ever since. They've never updated it since that time, but it really shows you how to protect cabins in the woods and homes, and you're basically cutting off holes that may be open under decks and using a Class A finish on roofs, which is a roof that won't light as easily too. Securing the buildings from unwanted persons, like I say, especially on these new job sites. That OSHA workplace perimeter should be up anyway, but if they're not, then you can have transient environment very easily, people going in and out of them. Combustible materials stacked and orderly. So you do get into fire codes and you get into buildings where there's a large amount of storage inside. We got to use stacked and orderly, and then make sure we have good exits coming out. And of course, a clearance from the ceiling. Beyond that, they can put quite a bit of stuff in them. Once you have a sprinkler system in it, if the product's going to overload the sprinkler system, you can have them reduce it or change the sprinkler system. But it really doesn't address the ones that do not have sprinkler protection. It's kind of interesting. This is another one I put in there. The storage maintained 2 feet from the ceiling in a non-sprinklered building. Years ago, people were taking red tape and putting along the walls because they'd been harassed by the fire marshals for storing too close to the ceiling. Well, for a risk side of it, at least with state risk management, they don't like to have the storage that high because it's a fall hazard and it may hurt somebody. But in the fire codes in 2018 edition, they finally looked at it and changed the verbiage of these non-sprinklered buildings to allow storage to go all the way to the ceiling. So now it can in fact go all the way to the ceiling per fire code, but for the risk portion, it's another problem. So there's differences going on in our fields. We try to line it up the best we can. The intent of the storage being below was always that if you're a firefighter, you can come to the entry door of the room and be able to reach all portions of the room with a fire hose. So the only problem we ever had was when we had storage in the center of the room that would block so that we couldn't make a safe suppression. So it's kind of nice to know the history of these things as well. So I always try my best to figure that out. The quantities of flammable liquids, it is interesting still in the codes. We can have 10 gallons of flammable liquids outside of a cabinet stored in a building, which is quite a bit of flammable liquids, but it's under the assumption that the containers are closed. So, and I run into that a lot. I do a lot of school inspections, and there's always a guy that's doing the ground stuff, and he'll have about 18 gas cans inside the maintenance room. I go, why do you need so many gas cans? And he says, well, I don't like to go to the store that much. I'm like, let's just get you down to 2 gas cans and you make more trips. I think that'll be a sensible thing. So any hazmat items, honestly, what they need to use is all they should ever have. But you get into college environment and people get grants. And I had a gentleman that had a grant for some liquid that he needed in his gauges for weather studies. Well, on the grant, he got enough money, so he bought this ethyl methyl bath stuff. It was really not the best stuff. I don't remember the product. He bought a 55-gallon drum of it, rolled it into his research lab, and like, you can't have this here. And he goes, but I had a grant. I spent the grant money. So we always try to work with people and say, just keep the minimum amounts that you need, and we can mitigate the risk that way. So kind of interesting, but 10 gallons of gas, still plenty inside a building. But if they're safety cans, they can do it. And then fire extinguishers. So fire extinguishers, especially in our non-sprinklered areas, we don't have protection in them. That fire extinguisher now becomes our protection for that building. So 75 feet maximum to them, and that is walking distance, and it includes the route. So if it's an open warehouse, you could have them 150 feet away. But if it's a walking distance through a building, it may require different spacings. And they do it in circles for some reason in that code. So it's kind of interesting. A 3-foot clearance around fire hydrants and fire department connections. That's always an interesting one. Some businesses want to hide their fire hydrant because it's ugly. So we'll put some bushes out there. Then the mean fire marshal comes along and makes you cut down your bushes, right? So we try our best to work with everybody, but Flags are a great indicator, especially in the wintertime. I used to tell the maintenance guys up to Utah State University when I worked there, the flag's not an indicator of where to dig for the hydrant. So don't put the snow on it. So it was kind of frustrating sometimes. Maintaining fire resistance rated construction is a huge thing. A lot of times people will balance a building. They'll have an HVAC system that requires some extra air. They'll go cut holes in the doors. It's like, don't cut holes in the doors if they're fire rated doors. Now we've messed up the fire rating of the building. So there's meetings that need to take place before people hack up buildings too. A giant firewall and warehouse, all of a sudden they decide to take the fire door off, put a regular garage door in. It's like, stop, please just call us, we'll help you, we promise. So we like that. Interior finishes, we run into this a lot in schools, especially elementaries. We get a high volume of paper. Pretty soon that's a huge fuel loading and a large fire hazard. So we try our best to minimize that. A lot of businesses don't get too crazy other than when somebody decides to post at your whole desk and area. I saw some beautiful pictures of that, teasing people. Yeah, and everything for exits, instant access, always. We constantly have blocked exits. If people are able to get out of a building, they're able to live. It's that simple. And I always tell everybody, buildings can be replaced, but if everybody gets out, you guys are all my hero. You've done a wonderful job. It's much better than investigating a fatality fire. That's the worst part of my job. So ensure special hazards are mitigated. There is a lot of those, combustible dusts, industrial ovens, flammable finishes, lumber yards. These are what we call target hazards in fire service. And generally your fire departments will go out and look at these target hazard areas. Safety during construction is another one. Construction company comes and forgets to bring their fire extinguishers. They have all this exposed wood. So we constantly go out there and evaluate the job sites while they're building them, make sure they have safety in place. And a biggie is making sure none of the construction workers smoke inside the job site. Smoking in the job site usually will start a fire sooner or later. So kind of good to know on that. So here's catastrophic fire loss 2010. Probably a lot of you remember this, the Provo Tabernacle fire. And our office at the time sent a whole bunch of resources down there to help out Provo fire. It was an interesting fire. It went up quite fast. They had this Christmas production going on, Gloria, all those nice, beautiful lights there. They had a private security company working for them. And the report, it is out and you can get it online. I'm not sure where, but if anybody wants it, I'll see if I can direct it to you. It's very interesting to read. The security personnel that showed up said, we can't get this security alarm to shut up. And he mentioned in the report, well, they mentioned that he'd said, I can't get this red panel to be quiet. Well, red fire, right? A lot of times there's no requirement they have to be red, but when they're red, it's usually a fire panel. He kept saying he was getting a security alarm upstairs. But he says, I don't know of any security alarms upstairs. I've reset it. He left and then it come on again. Well, that's because it had a smoldering fire upstairs and it was saying fire upstairs and he kept thinking it was security. So a huge mismatch right there, right off the get-go. So they get there and there's the timeline. You can see how quickly this fire was spreading after we wasn't quite ready. We wasn't prepared for this. Provo fire shows up 3:05 and by 4:25, they have this huge attic fire they're trying to catch. And obviously an older building like that, historical, not as much sprinkler protection, things that help mitigate, it goes up pretty quick. So there's where they get to finally go in and start investigating, right? In a nice warm part of winter, right? Unfortunately. I believe we had 3 or 4 investigators from our office with them down there, and Mike Young was one of them, the one that put this together originally. There's point of origin area. It ended up being a can light. So for that performance, they'd taken the can lights out of the ceiling and put in different colored lights. They set the lights over on wood planks that were up on the ceiling area, but didn't get the lights unhooked. So then when they'd start turning on all these lights for the performance, the lights were impinging right down on the wood until it finally caused enough heat to cause a smoldering fire. So oversights happen for sure, accidents happen. So some of their facts, they maintained custody, Provo Fire, from December 17th to January 23rd. Why they was investigating the fire to make sure we could find origin and cause. And it's really kind of interesting because some of the large loss fires, government, we can only go so far, and then high loss investigators come in. Sometimes we can work in unison. We do work with ATF. We work with locals that are further down the road, just want us to come and assist and be another set of eyes and ears. So there's a lot of flexibility that goes on. But some of these high risk ones, high loss, they do change quite a bit. The state of Utah does have high loss insurance investigations as well. So we work with risk management on those. So his total investigation hours, excess of 2,000 hours for this one. 120 tons of debris removed, they figured, roughly. A number of injuries, he couldn't remember exactly how many. They were fairly minor. But when you get climbing around on all this debris, there's nails and all sorts of pokey things that get you. Even when we usually have an arson accelerant dog. Right now we're in the process of applying for another one through our office, and it's with the ATF. The dog, we still have to take care of the dog. They can't go out on hot things, and they can't go out on some of these really bad fires. So it's bad enough for all of us. We try our best to get around there and do what we can, but the debris is not the funnest stuff to walk around on. You do get the injuries. So inches of snow from that time period, 22 inches of snow. Days above freezing, 0. It's not all glamorous, you know, hey, the fire investigator's here. You're like, well, let me get my shovel and my rake, because that's what we're gonna do, is go out and shovel and rake. So kind of interesting. And apparently they consumed a lot of Diet Coke, so that's good on them. I'll see if these links come up. We might not have any sound. So any questions?
I got one over here.
Yes.
I have a client that about 3 weeks ago, theoretically likely to get $1 million compactor out of a landfill. Should we have called the fire marshal's office for investigation?
So basically with the state law being the way it is, local jurisdictions decide first, and then they will call as needed. So when you do get into your more metropolitan areas, you will have a larger investigation group with a lot of them. Salt Lake Unified has a whole division of investigations. The bigger the city, typically, the more evolved it is. But the fire chief will make that determination whether they want to call us for assistance or not. So, and then our office, we're really trying to figure out if it's criminal or not. But once we get out on scene, we want to make sure we share the origin and cause and do a thorough investigation to help the department that's requested. So depending on where it was, that municipality may have had what they needed.
South Georgia, Trans Georgia landfill.
Okay.
And about the time the fire, it was a landfill after hours.
Oh, okay. So you mitigated it yourself, or they did?
And by the time the fire department got there, the fire was out.
Okay.
People saw it on the road. It could have been burning for hours.
Yeah.
200,000 pound compactor that basically is a piece of metal now. And
so there's some loss there for sure.
$1 million.
Oh man, yeah. So you probably have a private investigation on it, I would assume. Yeah. So a lot of the fire departments, they do what we call an NFIRS report. And that's their run report, and all that is goes back to a clearinghouse in our office. So if they've been able to determine the origin and cause was lightning on their end, they've submitted it that way. Occasionally we'll have an insurance investigator go out and they come up with a different thing. And it's okay that we're on different planes. We're not supposed to use any kind of bias or line up with anybody. But the NFIRS is really where they put that unless they do an investigation. And I'm sure that the fire department, that one would be quite aware. So it's funny, a lot of times people will say, hey, did you go on that fire the other day? I go, no, I didn't. And they're like, why not? I go, well, the way the law is written, I wait until they call. So some big ones we don't go, other ones we do, we go assist, but we're just that resource once that local entity makes the decision.
Thank you.
Anything else?
You mentioned the clearance around fire hydrants, you maintain the water system. So with that 3-foot clearance, you get equal trees, you get equal fences and that type of thing. Where does that lie when it comes to the fire hydrants? When is that 3-foot distance?
Well, the 3-foot allows us to do all of our operations we need to do with the hydrant, as well as hook the hoses. So the 3-foot clearance has been a standard clearance in the code that works when you're hooking multiple hoses and spinning wrenches. Even the caps need to be 18 inches off the ground. So if they're buried too low, you get a wrench down there and you flip it over and you take it off and you flip it over. So it's all about time and the accessibility to be able to use it, and also being able to see it. We've had fires across the nation where they pulled in and hooked a hydrant from a further distance away, and now they need a relay pump from another truck, which takes a while to set up. And there's a hydrant down in the Fitzers that we missed. We couldn't see it. So it's accessibility.
Is there any enforcement in that from the fire authorities? Do they have any when they remove this tree or remove this fence?
Yeah, occasionally we do have to have them take trees out too. I mean, it's in there for that purpose, to be able to see it and use it. And especially fire department connections on a school. I will see a tree that wasn't a problem the year before. I get out there and I go, you can trim the tree, cut it down if it's too close. If it's obstructed, we can have them build or make a sign and put out on the street. It says FDC with an arrow that points so the fireman can find it. So there's a few options you can use, but it's all about seeing and using quickly. All righty. Everybody sleep? Okay. Well, thank you for your time. I appreciate it. If you have any questions, just let us know at the fire marshal's office.